Did your family have favorites? If so, were you the favorite or someone else?
I can still picture that ordinary Tuesday afternoon in my Chicago office, where the relentless hum of fluorescent lights overhead seemed to mock the pounding in my temples as I hunched over yet another stack of marketing reports, desperately trying to meet the quarterly deadline that everyone knew could make or break my position at the firm after 15 years of climbing the ladder through sheer willpower and skipped lunches. At 45, with my life neatly compartmentalized into work emails, solitary gym sessions, and the occasional takeout dinner in front of true crime documentaries, I had convinced myself that this grind was the price of independence. Especially since my family back in Ohio had long ago proven unreliable when it came to anything beyond extracting favors. But that day, as my vision started to tunnel and my chest tightened like an overinflated balloon ready to burst, I realized my body was staging its own rebellion against the isolation I had so carefully cultivated. Everything blurred into a hazy void, my forehead slamming onto the desk amid the clatter of my overturned coffee mug spilling dark liquid across important documents, and in that instant of blackout, the world that I had built so meticulously around my professional armor began to crumble, leaving me sprawled there until a concerned coworker finally noticed and called for help, transforming what should have been just another workday into the catalyst for unraveling the fragile threads of my family ties. When consciousness trickled back hours later in the stark white confines of the hospital room, where the steady beep of monitors provided a rhythmic underscore to the nurse's gentle explanations about my severe anxiety attack exacerbated by chronic exhaustion and borderline dehydration, I felt a disorienting mix of relief and vulnerability wash over me, realizing that this episode was not merely a momentary lapse, but a stark warning from my overtaxed system after months of ignoring the subtle signs like the persistent fatigue that had me relying on caffeine to power through late-night strategy sessions. The doctor, a pragmatic man in his mid-50s with a clipboard full of test results showing nothing immediately fatal, but emphasizing the need for rest and support, insisted on notifying my emergency contacts. So I recited my parents' phone number from suburban Ohio without much thought, clinging to the outdated notion that blood ties might offer some semblance of comfort even though deep down I knew better from years of one-sided conversations where my contributions were acknowledged only when convenient. As the afternoon dragged on with no visitors materializing in the doorway and the Ford drip slowly replenishing what my body had depleted, the doctor's return with a furrowed brow confirmed my suspicions. He had left detailed voicemails for both Mom and Dad about my condition, urging them to come immediately, yet the phone lines remained stubbornly silent, leaving me to stare at the peeling paint on the ceiling while grappling with the hollow realization that in my hour of true need, the family I had propped up financially and emotionally for decades chose indifference over action. Discharged the next morning with a prescription for anti-anxiety medication and strict orders to take it easy, I returned to my quiet apartment overlooking the bustling streets of the city, where the familiar solitude now felt less like a sanctuary and more like a self-imposed exile, and as I settled into the worn leather couch with a mug of herbal tea steaming in my hands to soothe the lingering nausea, I reached for my phone out of habit, scrolling through social media feeds to numb the sting of abandonment, only to stumble upon my sister Sarah's latest Instagram post that twisted the knife deeper with its blatant dismissal of my crisis. There she was, 42 and perpetually posing as the picture of domestic bliss in her sprawling McMansion with her husband and two photogenic children, captioning a snapshot of a sunny family barbecue with Mom and Dad as family day, no drama this year, complete with emojis of hearts and grills that seemed to mock the very real turmoil I had just endured alone in that hospital bed while they grilled burgers and swapped stories without a single thought spared for the daughter who had wired thousands to cover their emergencies over the years. Sarah had always been the favored one, the charismatic sibling whose life unfolded like a highlight reel of suburban perfection, from her high school cheerleading days to her current role as an influencer peddling lifestyle tips. Whereas I was the behind-the-scenes enabler, the one who sent checks for Dad's shop repairs or Mom's medical copays without fanfare, only to receive perfunctory thanks before being sidelined in favor of Sarah's more entertaining narratives. That post ignited a slow-burning resolve within me, a decision to withhold the emotional outburst they might expect and instead embrace the power of calculated silence, allowing the weight of their neglect to settle without my intervention to diffuse it. Because after all the times I had rushed to their aid, like the $5,000 I transferred 2 years prior to bail Dad out of his casino debts incurred during a particularly rough patch for his auto repair business, followed by their collective radio silence when I confided in them about the heartbreak of my engagement falling apart at 39, I refused to play the role of the desperate pleader this time around. As the days blurred into a tentative recovery marked by light walks along the lakefront to rebuild my strength and cautious replies to work emails assuring my team that I would return stronger, I reflected on the pattern of invisibility that had defined our relationships, such as the instance when I drove 8 hours home after losing a major client pitch only to find them immersed in Sarah's backyard party, where Mom patted my shoulder with a vague, "You're tough, you'll bounce back," before turning back to the laughter, leaving me to nurse my wounds in the guest room with a bottle of cheap wine. This deliberate quiet became my initial form of subtle resistance, a way to reclaim agency without descending into the drama Sarah so smugly disavowed. And it wasn't long before an opportunity for a more tangible retaliation presented itself in the form of her professional network, which she had once eagerly connected with me on LinkedIn under the pretense of seeking career advice from her successful big sister. With a wry smile creeping across my face as I navigated the anonymous messaging feature on a burner account, I crafted a discreet tip to one of Sarah's key contacts at the real estate firm where she dabbled in freelance consulting, alluding vaguely to irregularities in recent property dealings based on whispers I'd overheard at family gatherings about her overly optimistic investment schemes, ensuring the note was innocuous enough to avoid legal backlash, but pointed enough to prompt a second look that might jeopardize her next lucrative referral. By the end of that evening, as I monitored the subtle shifts in her online presence from afar, a few connections quietly severed and a hurried update to her profile emphasizing her ethical practices, a sense of satisfying equilibrium washed over me. The clever sting of this payback serving as a quiet affirmation that I no longer had to absorb their slights without recourse, even if it meant navigating the moral gray area of anonymous interference. Yet, just as I powered down my laptop and prepared for an early night to honor my doctor's advice, a new notification chimed through the stillness, pulling me back into the fray with an unexpected family group chat invitation that I had been excluded from for months. The opening message from Dad reading simply, "Emily, we need to discuss the old house situation. It's urgent," leaving me staring at the screen with a surge of intrigue and wariness, wondering what buried family secret this sudden outreach was about to unearth after their conspicuous absence during my darkest moment. Staring at that unexpected group chat invitation glowing on my phone screen late into the evening after my subtle sabotage of Sarah's professional connections had provided a fleeting sense of balance amid the lingering ache of my hospital ordeal, I felt a familiar tension coil in my chest as I debated whether to accept the invite or let it dissolve into the digital ether like so many of their half-hearted overtures over the years, ultimately deciding to join silently so I could observe without committing to the emotional minefield that always seemed to accompany family communications, especially now when my body was still betraying me with waves of fatigue that made even simple tasks like preparing a meal feel like scaling a mountain. The chat history revealed innocuous updates at first, photos of Dad tinkering in his garage workshop and Mom sharing recipes from her latest church potluck, but the most recent message from Dad about the old house situation hung there like a veiled threat, referring to Grandma's longtime property in Ohio that had sat vacant since her passing 5 years ago, a place loaded with memories of summer visits where I played the dutiful granddaughter, helping with chores while Sarah charmed everyone with her stories. And now it seemed they were circling back to it as some kind of leverage or plea, prompting me to set the phone aside and retreat to bed, hoping sleep would fortify me against whatever storm was brewing without my immediate involvement. The next morning dawned with a hazy sunlight filtering through my apartment curtains, pulling me from a restless slumber where dreams of abandoned family gatherings intertwined with visions of my collapsed form unnoticed in the office. And as I shuffled to the kitchen to brew a pot of strong coffee that might chase away the remnants of weakness, still gripping my limbs after the anxiety attack, I noticed the phone had vibrated incessantly overnight, accumulating a staggering 65 missed calls, mostly clustered from Dad's number with a smattering from Mom, and even one from Sarah's line. Each voicemail timestamped in escalating urgency that painted a picture of desperation far removed from the carefree family day she had broadcasted online just days prior. Listening to the first few messages while stirring sugar into my mug, I heard Dad's voice crack with that gravelly Ohio accent honed from decades in the auto repair trade, starting with casual check-ins like, just wanted to see how you're holding up after that hospital thing we heard about, before shifting to more pointed appeals such as pick up, kiddo, we really need to talk about some family matters that can't wait, and by the later ones, it bordered on pleading with phrases like, this is important, call us back right away, which struck me as ironic given their swift dismissal of the doctor's urgent summons when I was the one fighting for breath in a sterile room. Mom's contributions were softer, but no less evasive, her tone laced with the passive guilt she often deployed, murmuring things like, we were worried, honey, but life gets busy with the grandkids and all. As if the demands of Sarah's picture-perfect household excused their absence, while Sarah's single attempt came across as obligatory, a curt, hey, heard you're okay, text if you need anything. That rang hollow, coming from the sister who had posted about drama-free bliss amid my crisis. That barrage of notifications transported me back to a particularly vivid memory from 2 years earlier, when Dad's gambling habit had spiraled during a slow season at a shop, leading to a frantic late-night call where he confessed to racking up $5,000 in casino debts that threatened to drag the family business under, and without hesitation I had logged into my banking app from my Chicago high-rise, transferring the funds instantly while reassuring him over the phone that it was no big deal because that's what sisters and daughters did, only to receive a group thank you text the next day followed by weeks of silence, when I later shared my own struggles with a demanding boss who had passed me over for a promotion in favor of a younger colleague, a slight that left me questioning my worth after pouring everything into my career. Sarah had even amplified the neglect by liking a viral post about strong independent women who don't need saving, which at the time I brushed off as her typical social media posturing, but now, in the quiet of my recovery, it fueled a dry, humor-tinged resentment that bubbled up as I thought about how the family dynamic always positioned me as the endless resource while they curated their narratives of self-sufficiency, making me wonder if this sudden influx of calls stemmed from genuine concern or the realization that their safety net was fraying without my unwitting support. The uncertainty gnawed at me, a constant undercurrent of doubt about whether to engage or maintain my wall of silence, especially as subtle clues emerged in the voicemails, like Dad's offhand mention of tying up loose ends with the estate, that hinted at hidden layers to Grandma's inheritance beyond the modest shares we had all discussed at her funeral, suggesting perhaps some undisclosed assets or complications that could explain their urgency without directly implicating my health scare. Resisting the impulse to dial back immediately, which would have handed them the control they seemed to crave, I channeled that building frustration into a more proactive form of witty retaliation by accessing the shared family credit card account we had established years ago for collective expenses like holiday gifts or emergency travel, an arrangement Sarah frequently exploited for her impulsive purchases, such as overpriced kitchen gadgets or boutique clothing that she then showcased in her influencer posts to project affluence. With a few strategic adjustments from my laptop, I reduced the available limit to a mere $200, sufficient for basic necessities, but woefully inadequate for her lavish whims, and sure enough, within hours a flurry of texts lit up the group chat with Sarah's exasperated query about the card declining during what she described as an essential shopping trip for home decor, her message laced with annoyance that provided me a private chuckle at the irony of her drama-free facade cracking under the weight of denied indulgence. This clever maneuver felt like a small but satisfying restoration of power, a light vulgarity in the form of financial pettiness that evened the score without overt confrontation. allowing me to lean back on the couch and savor the momentary peace as the afternoon sun warmed the room, though that tranquility shattered when my phone buzzed once more with a new voicemail from Mom. Her voice trembling in a way I had rarely heard as she whispered urgently about the inheritance being at risk due to Sarah's mounting troubles with some ill-advised investments, leaving me frozen in place with the device clutched in my hand, pondering the depth of the deception that had finally surfaced to demand my attention. Replaying Mom's trembling voicemail in the dim glow of my living room lamp as the evening shadows lengthened across the hardwood floors of my Chicago apartment, where the distant hum of city traffic served as a constant reminder of the independent life I had forged far from the entanglements of my Ohio roots. I grappled with the bombshell revelation about Grandma's inheritance hanging in precarious jeopardy due to Sarah's so-called troubles with investments that sounded suspiciously like the kind of reckless schemes she had hinted at in her overly polished social media updates over the past year. The mention of the estate, that modest but meaningful nest egg from Grandma's decades of teaching elementary school in small-town classrooms, had always been a distant comfort in my mind, a promise of future security that I had contributed to preserving by covering unexpected repair costs on the old house without complaint, yet now it appeared entangled in whatever mess Sarah had created, prompting a surge of protective instinct mixed with a bitter taste of exclusion that made me question whether my long-standing role as the family's silent benefactor had blinded me to the manipulations unfolding right under my nose. Deciding against an immediate response that would only invite more pleas and half-truths, I instead turned to my laptop on the coffee table cluttered with half-read marketing journals from work, launching a deeper dive into Sarah's digital footprint that began with her Instagram profile and quickly expanded to linked forums and public records, driven by a curiosity laced with the dry humor of imagining her curated world collapsing like a house of cards built on filters and fabricated bliss. Scrolling through the timeline of posts that painted Sarah as the epitome of middle-class aspiration, complete with sponsored hauls from home goods stores and captions extolling the virtues of family unity amid her photogenic chaos of school runs and PTA meetings, I couldn't help but let out a sardonic chuckle at the sheer audacity of her portraying a life of abundance when subtle discrepancies jumped out, such as the sudden influx of gratitude posts about unexpected windfalls that aligned suspiciously with the timeline of Grandma's will settlement 3 years prior, suggesting she had been dipping into the shared funds far beyond her allocated portion to maintain the illusion of prosperity. What a load of contrived nonsense, I thought, shaking my head at the way she tagged luxury brands in photos of vacations that our family budget had never supported before the inheritance. Her feed a masterclass in performative wealth that masked the reality of her husband's stagnant job in sales, and her own freelance gigs that barely covered the mortgage on that oversized house she loved showing off. The dilemma weighed heavily as I uncovered a thread in an online real estate community where anonymous users speculated about flipper frauds in our hometown area, with one comment referencing a Harper-linked deal gone sour that involved overstated property values to secure loans, planting the seed of a twist that Sarah might have been siphoning from the estate account set up for all 3 siblings, using it as collateral for her ambitious but flawed property ventures without consulting Dad or Mom, let alone me, the one who had always advocated for conservative management of those assets during our infrequent family calls. That discovery stirred an internal conflict that kept me pacing the length of my apartment, the cool air from the open window brushing against my skin as I debated the merits of direct confrontation, which might force a hasty apology and temporary mending of fences, against the more satisfying path of quiet exposure that could dismantle her facade piece by piece, though I knew deep down that such a choice might strike outsiders as overly vengeful or unforgiving, especially in a culture that preached family loyalty above all, making me the villain in their narrative for prioritizing self-preservation over reconciliation. Flashbacks to earlier betrayals amplified the tension, like the time 4 years ago when I had flown home unannounced after a grueling audit at work left me questioning my career path, only to walk into a celebration of Sarah's promotion where the inheritance check she waved around was fresh from the bank, her toast to shared successes omitting any nod to the legal fees I had covered to expedite the probate process, leaving me to smile through gritted teeth as Mom pulled me aside with a whispered, "Don't make waves, Em. She's finally on her feet." Humor edged into my reflections as I pictured Sarah's horrified expression if her followers learned the truth behind those blessed updates. A light vulgarity in the form of petty satisfaction at the thought of her scrambling to explain away the discrepancies without the polish of her ring lights. Emboldened by that growing resolve amid the uncertainty of how far the siphoning had gone, perhaps enough to jeopardize the entire pot that Dad relied on for his retirement supplements, I seized on a clever avenue for revenge that played to her obsession with online validation, accessing an old shared photo album from our family cloud storage that contained unedited snapshots from holidays past, including one particularly unflattering image from last Thanksgiving where Dad was caught mid-yawn, with spinach stuck in his teeth, Mom's apron smeared with gravy, and Sarah herself looking disheveled after a wine-fueled argument over politics, which I anonymously uploaded to a popular local parenting forum she actively engaged in for networking, captioning it innocuously as "Authentic Family Holidays, Real Moments Over Perfection," to seed doubt without direct accusation. Within an hour, the post garnered shares and comments questioning the relatability of her brand, forcing Sarah to issue a hurried story clarification about hacked accounts that only drew more scrutiny. The dent to her influencer credibility providing me a quiet thrill of witty justice that restored some equilibrium to the power imbalance she had perpetuated for so long. As the night deepened and I finally powered down the devices to heed my body's call for rest, a persistent knocking echoed through the hallway outside my door, growing more insistent with each rap, and peering through the peephole revealed Dad standing there in the hallway light, his face drawn with exhaustion and determination, mouthing words I couldn't hear but knew signaled the confrontation I had both dreaded and anticipated. Hesitating for a long moment with my hand on the doorknob after peering through the peephole to confirm Dad's weary figure illuminated by the hallway's harsh bulb, where his familiar silhouette carried the weight of too many unresolved family burdens from his days managing the auto shop through economic downturns and personal setbacks, I finally twisted the lock and stepped aside to let him in, the cool draft from the corridor mingling with the warmth of my apartment as he shuffled over the threshold, his eyes scanning the space with a mix of nostalgia and urgency that immediately set my defenses on high alert despite the lingering fatigue from my recent collapse, still making my movements deliberate and measured. Robert Harper, at 68 with silver threading through his once dark hair and hands calloused from years of wrench turning, collapsed onto the edge of my couch without waiting for an invitation, launching into his explanation before I could even offer a glass of water or a seat, his voice gravelly and laced with the desperation I recognized from past crises, like the time his business nearly folded during the recession, detailing how Sarah's real estate ventures had spiraled into a financial black hole involving over-leveraged loans on properties she flipped too ambitiously, leaving the family estate, Grandma's inheritance, as the only collateral left to salvage the situation and prevent lenders from seizing the old house that held so many childhood memories for all of us. As he pulled a crumpled envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the coffee table toward me, his plea intensified with specifics about needing $10,000 as a bridge loan to cover immediate shortfalls until Sarah could liquidate one of her assets, framing it as a temporary fix that would preserve the inheritance pot we had all counted on for retirement cushions and perhaps even helping me with a down payment on something more permanent in the city, though the way his gaze darted away suggested deeper complications tied to favoritism that had festered unspoken for years, making me wonder if this outreach was truly about unity or just another extraction from the reliable sibling who had always shouldered the load without complaint. The conflict escalated right there in my living room as I absorbed his words, the air thick with the unspoken history of how our parents had perpetually pitted Sarah and me against each other in subtle ways, like praising her spontaneity, while chiding my practicality during family dinners, a dynamic that had only worsened after Grandma's death when decisions about the will seemed to favor the one with the growing family over the career-focused daughter living states away. That envelope, once I unfolded it under the soft lamplight, delivered the gut-wrenching twist I had half suspected but never confronted: a formal letter from the estate attorney dated 3 years prior, outlining how a portion of my share had been quietly reallocated to immediate family needs such as Sarah's home down payment and child-related expenses, effectively cutting me out under the guise of collective benefit, with Mom's signature authorizing the change that she must have hidden from me during our superficial check-in calls, leaving me to stare at the document in stunned silence, while Dad shifted uncomfortably and muttered something about it being for the greater good at the time. The revelation hit like a delayed aftershock from my hospital episode, transporting me back to a poignant flashback 6 years ago when I had been on the cusp of a wedding that promised the stability I craved after a string of disappointing relationships. Meticulously planning a modest ceremony in a lakeside venue with a guest list that included the whole family, only for Sarah's unexpected announcement of a second pregnancy to derail everything as Mom and Dad redirected their attention and resources to her expanding household, canceling their travel plans with apologies that rang hollow like, "We can't miss this milestone, but yours will come around again," ultimately leading me to call off the engagement myself when the isolation became too overwhelming amid their divided loyalties. What a load of selective priorities, I thought with a bitter humor that masked the deeper hurt, recognizing how that incident had solidified my path of self-reliance, pouring my energy into promotions and savings while they celebrated Sarah's life stages with the inheritance funds that were rightfully meant to support all 3 children equally, now weaponized against me in this plea that forced a dilemma I knew many would view as straightforward: simply forgive and contribute for the sake of blood ties, disagreeing with any impulse toward retribution as petty or destructive to the fragile family fabric. Yet in that moment, surrounded by the neutral tones of my apartment that reflected my hard-won independence, the growing uncertainty about their true motives, whether this was genuine peril or manipulative extortion, propelled me toward a calculated response that honored my boundaries without immediate explosion, excusing myself to the kitchen under the pretense of fetching coffee while Dad waited expectantly. Seizing the opportunity for revenge in the privacy of my bedroom with the door cracked just enough to monitor his presence, I downloaded a voice-altering app on my phone that I had bookmarked from a work tech demo on digital security, crafting a spoofed call to Sarah's number disguised as an official auditor from the estate firm, my modulated tone delivering a stern message about initiating a full review of discrepancies in the Harper Trust accounts due to flagged irregularities in withdrawals over the past 3 years, complete with fabricated details about scheduled audits and potential liens that would hit her properties hardest. Her response came swiftly in a panicked voicemail that I recorded without her knowledge, her voice rising in flustered defense as she inadvertently confessed to borrowing just enough to keep things afloat. "It's not like I meant to take from anyone permanently." The slip providing me with irrefutable evidence tucked away like a loaded safety net, the witty satisfaction of this non-confrontational trap easing the sting of the will's betrayal while restoring a sliver of control in the escalating family power play. As Dad eventually rose to leave with a hopeful, "Think it over, we can't do this without you," promising to follow up soon, I nodded noncommittally and saw him out, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving me alone with the envelope and my thoughts. But before I could even process the implications fully, my phone vibrated sharply with an incoming text from Sarah herself, the message reading in bold letters, "I know Dad was there. Back off, or I'll make sure everyone hears about your little meltdown. Don't push me." Gripping my phone tightly as Sarah's threatening text lingered on the screen like a venomous afterthought to Dad's emotional plea just minutes earlier, where she warned of exposing my hospital meltdown to anyone who would listen if I dared interfere further in their mounting crisis, I felt the full weight of the family's tangled web pressing down on me in the quiet confines of my apartment. The city lights twinkling mockingly outside the window as if to highlight the isolation I had chosen over their chaos, prompting a deep breath to steady the rush of anger mixed with the weary resolve that had carried me through recovery from my collapse and now fueled my determination to orchestrate a confrontation on my terms rather than reacting to their piecemeal manipulations. The ambiguity of their sudden need, framed as urgent but laced with years of selective affection, had built to this precipice over the past days, with subtle clues from voicemails and that damning estate letter painting a picture of not just financial desperation but deliberate exclusion that made me question every past sacrifice, from the late-night wire transfers for Dad's shop to the ignored birthdays when Sarah's milestones took precedence, leaving me to wonder if this was the moment to sever the ties permanently or extend a conditional olive branch that preserved my dignity while exposing their deceptions. Deciding against letting her intimidation dictate the pace, I initiated a group video call to all three of them that very evening, my heart pounding with a mix of trepidation and calculated anticipation as their faces popped up one by one on the split screen, Dad's furrowed brow from his recliner, Mom's fluttering hands in the kitchen background, and Sarah's forced composure from what looked like her vanity setup, all of them exchanging uneasy glances that betrayed their shared secret before I even spoke. Launching into the heart of it without preamble, I shared my screen to display the spoofed voicemail recording of Sarah's panicked confession about borrowing from the inheritance, the audio filling the call with her own words admitting to the siphoning as a temporary measure that had snowballed into deeper trouble, watching their reactions unfold in real time as Dad's face paled and he stammered excuses about protecting the family unit. Mom dissolved into tears, murmuring apologies for the will changes she had signed off on in a moment of maternal bias, and Sarah launched into a defensive tirade accusing me of betrayal for digging into private matters when she had only been trying to secure a better future for her kids amid her husband's job instability. The conflict crested there amid the digital static, their pleas intertwining with justifications that revealed the full twist I had pieced together from online trails and the envelope's fine print. Sarah's real estate woes were a smokescreen for an elaborate sympathy scam where she faked a pregnancy announcement on her influencer platforms 6 months ago, complete with ultrasound images edited from stock photos and tearful stories soliciting donations from followers under the guise of medical costs for a miracle baby that never existed, funneling those funds into her failing flips to the tune of thousands that now risked exposing the entire family to fraud investigations if not resolved swiftly. What a convoluted load of fabricated desperation, I thought with a wry internal humor that kept my voice steady as I laid it out. The light vulgarity of their scheme's absurdity underscoring how far they had strayed from the modest values Grandma had instilled, turning her legacy into a prop for Sarah's online empire while cutting me out as the inconvenient truth-teller who remembered the original intent of equal shares. That unveiling forced the ultimate dilemma upon us all, with Dad begging for my intervention to wire the $10,000 immediately and smooth things over with the lenders before audits uncovered the pregnancy ruse, Mom appealing to my sense of sisterhood by recounting shared childhood hardships like the summers we spent at the old house dreaming of brighter futures, and Sarah hissing threats through gritted teeth about how my cold-hearted stance would destroy the family they had built without me. Her words designed to guilt me into compliance as the responsible one who had always bailed them out before. Emotions ran high in that call, the air charged with raw honesty that peeled back layers of resentment I had buried for years, and while part of me ached at the fractured bonds, recalling the warmth of holiday gatherings before the favoritism took hold, another part reveled in the impending revenge of setting boundaries they couldn't ignore, a choice that might strike many as unforgivably detached, especially in an era where family reconciliation stories dominate the media and viewers might disagree with my refusal to fully forgive, seeing it as a tragic self-sabotage rather than empowerment after decades of one-sided giving. Opting for a measured path that honored my strength without total destruction, I agreed to the wire transfer, but only $5,000. Routing it through the estate attorney with ironclad conditions that restructured the trust to bar Sarah from further access until full repayment with interest accrued at market rates, plus a consultant's fee deducted for my advisory role in untangling the mess, effectively turning their crisis into a lesson in accountability that left them sputtering in protest but unable to refuse without accelerating their downfall. As the call ended with strained goodbyes and promises of gratitude that rang as empty as their initial hospital silence, the days following brought a barrage of follow-up messages, Dad's daily check-ins laced with remorse, Mom's forwarded articles on family healing, and Sarah's passive-aggressive posts about lessons in humility that thinly veiled her fury, culminating in another 65 missed calls that I let accumulate while focusing on my gradual return to work, the weakness from my episode fading into a newfound clarity about the cost of entanglement. In the quiet of one such evening, phone in hand as Dad's latest voicemail pleaded once more with "We need you, call now and let's fix this together," I allowed a small, knowing smile to curve my lips, the expression carrying the weight of quiet triumph and lingering uncertainty about whether this minimal aid had mended anything or merely postponed the inevitable rupture, then locked the screen with deliberate finality, deleted the group chat, and slipped back under the covers to sleep, leaving the truth of our fractured bonds suspended in ambiguity. Had I reclaimed my life or condemned myself to deeper solitude? A question that echoed unanswered in the darkness as the city hummed on indifferently below.